Far away, but not long ago, saw a man with a golden soul. He saw no right, but he spoke no wrong. He wrote no rip, but he sang no song. Today's the day said to me, I'll cut your chains and I'll set you free. Now there ain't no one to tell you how to fight your fight or to take your bow. But lo, behold, it ain't so nice. A lot of long car rides, a lot of cold, cold nights. 'Cause it ain't that easy being free from yourself when you ain't got no water, no books on your shelf. And now you see I'm free from sin, from love, from pain, or any trouble I've been in. But who needs trouble when you got love? But then, who needs love? It's too much trouble for some.
Well, hi folks, and welcome back to Cigarettes, Coffee, and Christ. I am your host, Thaddeus Paul Collins. So, I haven't really commented it much on Facebook. I guess I'll do it here about the riots and stuff. When I was first planning this episode, Corona was still going on, and that seems to be about over now. So, if you've noticed, I've pretty much tried to stay out of it, honestly. I think the killing of that man was awful. It was one of the worst ones. I mean, they're all horrible, but that one really got everyone all worked up, and for good cause. So, I've actually, a lot of people may not know this. I get thrown into, the right or conservative. I don't know why all anarchists and libertarians do, but I've always actually been a pretty big Black Lives Matter supporter. It's not completely altruistic. It's that movement and anarchy lines up. We have some similar concerns. We have similar issues with the police state, and I definitely believe that the government has systematically abused black people. That's what I personally believe. I know a lot of people disagree with that, and that's fine. So I've always kind of been in that camp with them. We share similar, goals and concerns. The writing, I can say this here. This is my, my channel. You have to come here to see my opinions. So I don't agree with them. As someone who is nonviolent, and I don't believe that furthers any causes. That being said, I do see the other side of things. I think it was a perfect storm of people being locked up from Corona. That mixed with one of the more horrible, deaths caught on camera we've seen. And again, I'm not diminishing any of the other ones. But, I understand that initial outburst of rage, but ultimately I am against rioting. I am against the looting. I don't think that moves anyone's cause along. But again, I am a white guy. I like to think I'm not racist. I, know people from all walks of life and colors and shapes and everything. So I've just stayed out of this one. I don't want to pass any judgment. Just personally, I think the destruction is counterproductive to the community, to the cause, to all that stuff. But that's not what we're talking about today. I've been trying to get this episode out for a while. I bought a camera that I wanted to record on, and it turned out to be a super cheap camera, and I couldn't get the sound to sync up, so I shelled out the money and got this new one. This is a nicer camera. I don't know quite how it does in low light. I'm looking at my little monitor here. I think I got enough natural light in here for it to work. It's a little cloudy, but we're just going to go for it because I don't have a lot of time to do these. I've been working crazy hours, and even though these come out kind of shitty, I'm still learning. It still takes a lot of time to kind of hash out my ideas and get everything set up, and then post-production I have to sync up the audio separately, and now I'm trying to do clips. So anyway, it takes me a while to get these out, and yeah, but I have some time now before it gets too hot in here. And I don't know, it's so weird. I get super nervous every single time I do it. Like, it's not like I can't just redo it or erase it. No one's seeing it yet, but hopefully that'll go away. So anyway, what we are getting into is, let's see. I have notes. But the devil and hell, we're going to talk about that. And what brought this topic about is the video game Doom Eternal. It's the latest entry in a long-running series of games from developer ID Software. If you're unfamiliar with this series, it's super popular. I'm sure you've heard of it in some form or other. The premise is very simple. You play a space marine stationed on a military or research base on Mars. A portal to hell opens through some experiment or accident, and demons invade the station. And your job is to kill them. It's a pretty simple concept. And then as the games progressed, the stories became more in depth. They started looking more and more into, hell and its troops and the demons and the war and all of that, and the hierarchy of these various factions and demons. I've been playing a lot of Doom Eternal. It's a fantastic game. It's one of the best I've played in a while in terms of just pure, gory, heavy metal fun. It's just a blast. This is a follow-up to 2016's game, simply titled Doom. And this marked a return of the series to modern consoles and PCs. The last one they did was Doom 3 for PC a while ago. And they kind of changed the gameplay around. It was still good, and they turned it more into like a survival horror. And I love Doom Eternal's campaign. It is brutal in difficulty and pace, but in a way that teaches you to be good. It rewards skill and practice, and I love games like that are hard, but they give you all the tools you need to beat them. And if there's like a legitimate learning curve that pushes you to get better, I love that stuff. It's fair. I'm going through the game on the second to hardest setting right now, and it just gets better the harder you crank up the difficulty. You think you get frustrated with it, but you just get better. I love it. You just really have to get good, as they say. It's got some notable additions from the 2016 version. It's got a dash and a meat hook. When you master these, the game becomes just a ballet as you dance around the battlefield, just ripping demons to pieces. The soundtrack is incredible. It shreds perfectly along to the side, the mayhem, and it's a huge part of the game. I haven't got it yet, but I definitely want to get the actual soundtrack because it is super hard and super cool. My biggest problem with Eternal is the multiplayer. The last one, they had all kinds of classic like deathmatch and capture the flag game types. In exchange, they did something called battle mode in this one, which is an asymmetrical shooter. If you don't know what that means, it's like you have a group of players versus like a really strong single player. So this one they have what do they? Yeah, they did it with like you play two of the demons from the game, so it's a 2-on-1 kind of thing versus the Doom Slayer. I don't like it too much. I know they're retooling it, and I have played it since then, and it's better. Like, just the matchmaking's not that great, and it always seems lopsided in favor of the demons. But I don't know. I'm liking it more and more. I just wish they would bring back some of like the classic multiplayer stuff. And if you're wondering why a Christian such as myself is playing such an over-the-top, violent, bloody game, I did an episode on that. You can check it out. It's called, it's episode 4, titled Deadpool and Temple Meat, and I talk about all that kind of stuff. So I'm not going to rehash all that here. But for Doom Eternal, there's no language in the game. The violence is so like over the top. It's cartoonish. Literally fighting demons in the forces of hell. So it's great. If you guys are into video games and you like difficult, fast-paced stuff, you should play it. It's a blast. It's so much better than like the endless Call of Duty and Modern Warfare and all of those. So there's my little review of Doom. And so that's what brought up this topic, because they continue to flesh out the lore of hell in this game. And I'm not going to go into it here, the lore of the game, because it's just ridiculous. The demons are harvesting souls for a type of energy. They're powering machines, and then they have these alliances with human corporations, and it just goes off the rails. But it got me thinking, like, what do we really know about hell and the devil? And what information do we get from the Bible, and what information comes from fantasy and outside sources? This was going to be a single quick episode, but it's going to be a 2 or 3 parter now, I think, because I've been delayed in recording, and I keep finding out some more interesting stuff. So I mainly want to deal with, let's see, if I don't stick to my notes too much, then I'll talk about something further down the notes, and then I get all screwed up. So this first part, I want to talk about the ruler of hell, the devil, El Diablo, adversary, Satan, Lucifer, and so on. And we all know the story, right? Even if you're not a Christian, you're probably aware of the story of the fall of Satan. He was the smartest and the bestest angel. He was beautiful. He was the leader of worship, of music in heaven, and he became so prideful, and he so into himself. He thought he was perfect, and he wanted to challenge God for the throne of heaven. So he gets up his army of rebel angels. There's a war in heaven. Satan and his angels lose, and then God casts him down to hell, where he rules. So we all know this story, right? And I was just going to try to look it up on where that is in the Bible. And that's when it got weird. I couldn't actually find that story in the Bible. The story we all know, like the origins of Satan, well, we're going to get into it. I couldn't actually really find it. So, sorry, I keep giving me some pops here. I'm hitting that microphone. So how I often start these things is with a Google search. This narrows things down and at least gives me a place to start. I know the Bible pretty good, but with this, I had no idea where the fall story was. Again, thought it'd be a little quick look up, read the story. Satan, okay, this is what's happening. I had all these notes, and then I kind of figured out a new take on it. So, we know the devil was there in Genesis to tempt Eve. So this means the war had already happened. Satan had already been cast down. So whenever this war took place, it was before the creation of man, but after the creation of heaven. And this is one of the reasons I have trouble with the whole everything created in 144 hours thing. It's like, according to the story we know, there were already kingdoms in heaven, and there was a war, and there was this. It just seems like a lot happened, by like Tuesday or whatever. So Googling, I just looked up, where is the fall of Satan in the Bible? And all of these pages took me to 2 main verses. The first passage we will look at is Ezekiel 28, 11 through 19. This is, I think I have down here the NIV version, which is fine. I like ESV, but I already have this one here, so we're just going to use this one. So yeah, Ezekiel 28, verse 11 through 19. The word of the Lord came to me. Excuse me. I'm probably not going to edit that out in post, so let's start again. Ezekiel 28, 11 through 19, NIV. The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, take up a lament concerning the king of Tyre and say to him, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Oh my gosh, I shouldn't drink so much coffee before I do these. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone adorned you, carnelian, chrysolite, and emerald, topaz, onyx, and jasper, lapis lazuli, turquoise, and beryl. Your settings and mountings were made of gold. On the day you were created, they were prepared. You were anointed a guardian cherub, for so I ordained you. You were on the holy mount of God. You walked among the fiery stones. You were blameless in your ways. From the day you were created till wickedness was found in you. Through your widespread trade you were filled with violence and you sinned. I drove you in disgrace from the mount of God and expelled you, guardian cherub, from among the fiery stones. Your heart became proud on account of your beauty, and you corrupted your wisdom. Because of your splendor, so I threw you to the earth. I made a spectacle of you before kings. By your many sins and dishonest trade, you have desecrated your sanctuaries, so I made a fire come out from you, and it consumed you, and I reduced you to ashes on the ground. In the sight of all who are watching, and all the nations who knew you are appalled at you. You have come to a horrible end and will be no more. So, for some reasons, all the scholars I was looking at think this is referring to the fall of Satan. It's referencing the fall of Satan. They say the first 10 verses refer to the ruler of Tyre, and then in verse 11 it switches to a metaphor or story about Satan. I don't know why, but since that's the consensus of sorts, we are going to focus on the verses in question. So literally, this is literally a message to the king of Tyre. It says so. The word of God, the Lord came to me, son of man, take up a lament concerning the king of Tyre and say to him. So, on the surface level, it is what it is. The prophets received messages from God. They delivered them to whatever ruler or person, God wanted to send the message from. That's what prophets did. So I can definitely see, some similarities to the story we know. And originally, I was going to go through this point by point and point out why it's referring to a man. And if anything, this king could be being compared to Adam. I'm going to point out a few things here. I'm still going to do part of that. But like I said, since I've been working on this a little longer and thinking about it, there's a way easier way to go about this. So first of all, and verse 14, it says, you were anointed as a guardian cherub, for so I ordained you. Satan was never ordained the cherub, the protecting angel of the Garden of Eden. That wasn't him. Then we have, I don't know. There's a few things here. It ends with all the nations who knew you are appalled at you. You have come to a horrible end and will be no more. Well, we know according to the Bible that Satan was not ended here. He was not made no more. He was not burned to ash. Like it says, 18, by your many sins and dishonest trade, you have desecrated your sanctuaries. I made a fire come out from you, and it consumed you, and I reduced you to ashes on the ground. So none of that fits in with Satan. That just doesn't. None of that applies to him. He was not killed. He was never the guardian angels in the Garden of Eden. And why I think it, if anything, if they are doing an allegory or a metaphor here, he's comparing this king of Tyre to Adam, who we have you were in the Garden of Eden, you were full of wisdom and perfect beauty, You were blameless in your ways from the day you're created till wickedness was found in you. I don't even think I think this is like actually just this message to this king. And I think if anything, he's comparing his kingdom and his fall to Adam. And that's what it is. We're going to get back into this. I'm trying to piece this together as I go because I'm doing some different things here. So anyway, those are some parts of it that lead me to believe it's not, comparing this king to Satan. There's some bigger reasons in a minute. So let's see. The next verse is one that, this one sounds a lot more like it, but we're going to talk about why I don't think this one works either. The next verse that I was able to look up when people talk about the story of the fall of Satan is Isaiah 14, verses 12 through 17. How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth. You who once laid low the nations, you said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God, and I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly, on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down into the realm of the dead, to the depths of the pit. Those who see you stare at you. They ponder your fate. Is this the man who shook the earth and made kingdoms tremble? Is this the man who made the world a wilderness, who overthrew its cities and would not let his captives go home? Now this sounds more like the story we know, right? We got, I will ascend, I will raise my throne up, and all of this. This sounds more like the story we know. So a lot of people think this is referencing the story of the fall of Satan from heaven. Now this is also just a portion of, I'm doing that intentionally. This is just kind of taken out of context because this is part of a bigger chapter and story. And the chapter states that this is a message to the king of Babylon. Very clearly, again, like we have the other situation. The prophet was given a message by God to give to this king. That's on a literal base level. That's what the story is. So what I was doing is going through and trying to figure out if these verses were really referring to the fall of Satan. And I was going to go through like kind of I did and go point by point and say, well, no, this is referring to this. This is referring to this. Like here in Isaiah, it says, verse 16, it is the man who shook the earth and made kingdoms tremble. Okay, clearly referencing a man. And the man who made the world a wilderness. So it's clearly referring to this person as a man. But here's what I started to learn when I was looking at this. Jews or ancient Israelites, they don't really have heaven and hell in the Old Testament. They don't really, none of this imagery would even be created for a long, long time. It's interesting that they have Sheol, which is Sheol. It refers to just the afterlife. It's kind of both heaven and hell. It's just described as death or a place of shadows or the pit. There's no separation of like a good place and a bad place in the Old Testament. And then I wanted to try to do a little thought experiment. So pretend you don't know anything about the story of the fall of Satan. You know nothing about the war in heaven. You know nothing about Satan trying to take over the throne. Any of that. You don't know any of that. So then, pretending you don't know anything about the fall of Satan, would you be able to extract that story, that complete story from these two verses? You can't. There's not enough there. And then when I was reading some of these papers by these other scholars, they said, oh, we believe this passage is referencing the fall of Satan. Okay. But what are you referencing? Does that make sense? They're saying this is referencing the fall of Satan, but they don't tell you what book that's in. They don't tell you what story you can't reference something without there being something to reference. I know I may not be describing that right. So when these guys are saying these verses reference the fall of Satan, that's not telling me what they're referencing. Where is that story recorded? Where are those notes? So that's just a falsity in like explaining it. There's no point of reference for these verses to be referencing. Now let me see what else I got here, because I kind of have my notes spread all over here. So that's the angle I wanted to come at. I was thinking of breaking down those verses, but there's no need to, because these concepts of heaven and hell and angels and demons did not exist at the time those passages were written. Okay, we have the adversary. Okay, we have the serpent in the garden. So we do definitely have an adversary, Satan, but heaven and hell were not concepts yet. They weren't something that the ancient Israelites would have even been thinking about. So then you have, where am I at? I'm all over here. Let me pull up I wanted to say you can't extract that story from just those passages. They're not giving us any reference point to what those passages are referencing. And then you do have hell-like imagery, and you have demons, and you have angels, and you have Satan in the New Testament. But everything they're saying that's referring to the story of the fall of Satan, they're referencing verses in the Old Testament, and that wouldn't have been a thing yet. So, and most scholars believe that Revelations is not talking about a past event. Like almost everyone I looked up believe it's describing a future event. So it's not in some like weird Tarantino-esque way of telling this part of the story at the end of the book that's supposed to happen at the beginning of the book. Because that does kind of happen sometimes. The Bible, parts of it are not chronological. This is just how they put it together. You can get chronological Bibles. They're actually pretty cool, but this is not the case here. Everyone seems to be agreed that this Revelations is describing a future event, not an earlier one. So that right there makes it kind of fall apart for me, the story. And then I wanted to, I found this really cool article. His references check out pretty good. The History of and Origins of Satan. This is a study by Lucas Sweeney. And he talks about how Satan just meant adversary in the Old Testament. David, who became King David, was referred to as a Satan. It was like a noun. It wasn't a name. It was a thing. It was an adversary. It was a stumbling block. It was a Satan. And the first time you see this is in, see if I can pull up, if I save the verse. Okay, so this is where it got a little weird. The first, where King David, or David at the time, is called a Satan, you have to do a little concordance and you have to look at the old language. So the ESV version says this: "But the commanders of the Philistines were angry with him, and the commanders of the Philistines said to him, 'Send the man back, that he may return to the place to which you have assigned him. He shall not go down with us to battle, lest in the battle he becomes an adversary to us. For how could this fellow reconcile himself to his Lord?'" Would it not be the heads of men here? So if you pull out your little concordance, which I'm not doing here because it's like 100 pounds, and I don't know where it is right now. So I did do an online one. Adversary translates to Satan in ancient Hebrew. So then I went and looked up that same passage in an Orthodox Jewish Bible of the Old Testament. Now, I'm going to totally butcher some of these words because I do not speak ancient Hebrew. It is in English, but some of these words don't look like they're in English. So I'm going to try to choke my way through this. Same verse. This is in a more literal, direct translation from an Orthodox Jewish Bible or Old Testament. Excuse me. "And the Saram of the Pelishtim," I think that means let's see here. The Philistines. So, okay. And the Saram of the Pelishtim were angry with him, and the Saram of the Pelishtim said unto him, Send the Ish back, so that he may turn against his Macom place or home, which thou hast assigned him, and let him not go down with us to Melkamah, lest in the Melkamah he be as Satan, adversary, antagonist to us. For wherewith should he make himself acceptable unto his Adon? It is not with the heads of these Anshmen. So, I totally butchered all of those Jewish words, I am sure. But you see, here it just uses Satan. So I'm usually pretty in favor of different versions of Bibles. I don't have any problem with that. The NIV is a little easier to look things up. Here's where I found it to be kind of an issue, though, because if you don't find an old enough translation or a translation that retains some of the original Hebrew words or pronunciations, you would have never read that like in a modern Bible. Like even the ESV, which is a fairly direct translation, says adversary, and then you get into NIV and the language is completely different. So the word Satan was used, I don't know, like 6 times, I think I looked up, to refer to men, to refer to very definite human men. And then 4 times it does refer to celestial beings. But here's the thing, like God, I don't want to butcher this, what I'm probably going to. There wasn't a separation of God and Satan. And I'm not saying they're the same thing at all. I'm saying the concepts in the really old passages of the Old Testament, it was directly God that sent a being to interfere with someone or to punish someone. It wasn't like an evil force trying to destroy mankind or to attack mankind. It all came from God. The punishment, these angels or spirits, they were all, God was in control. I mean, he's in control now. Sometimes concepts in your heart that you can visualize and think on a deeper level are hard to express. Heaven and hell were the same place. It was just the afterlife. There were adversaries. There were spirits. We do know of things that resembled demons in the Old Testament, but they were different. It would be like a goat creature, or I don't know, like the spirits inhabited animals. It was a different system. It wasn't like we have in the New Testament where Jesus talked more, clearly about these things. So I know I'm missing a bunch of stuff, but that's the point, is like, we don't have to go through and break apart these verses piece by piece, because there's a simpler way to look at it. The simplest way to look at it is that these concepts of heaven and hell, angels and demons, God and the devil, were not really a thing in the Old Testament. So I don't understand how the story of the fall of Satan could be referenced in these passages when that wasn't even a concept yet. Is that kind of making sense? That's what I'm trying to get apart. So where did we get it then? Where did this concept come from? If it's clearly not an afterlife that's in the Old Testament, it's clearly not a concept that would come along for quite a while. So I was looking it up. Let's see. I thought I had some interesting... Oh, yeah. There's one more thing I wanted to touch on first. So the closest thing... This is kind of cool. There is one reference to Satan, actual Satan, in the Old Testament that seems like this is the closest thing we have to like the origins of the Satan we know today. And that's in Job. And the pronunciation is a little different. Instead of just using Satan as like a noun or description or whatever, it's Ha-Satan, and that means the Satan. That means that's a definition. That's the Satan. I don't know why I have so much gas today. And that's in the book of Job. That's when this adversary, the Satan, we kind of get an idea of this is a higher ranking guy. He, of course, if you know the story of Job, he's the one who's like, hey, let me test this guy's loyalty to you. Let me, just ruin his life and see if he still worships you. And anyway, you should probably know the story of Job. But that's the only time in the Old Testament we actually have a figure referred to as Satan as like an individual, as an actual, proper noun type villain. But it's still, Job says nothing about his armies. It says nothing about the battle, anything. So I've mainly focused on the war in heaven and hell and the fall of Satan in this episode, because that's what brought it on by the game Doom. This war of, hierarchy of angels and demons and this guy being thrown in it. So I can pretty strongly say that the story of the fall of Satan becoming jealous of God, trying to overthrow heaven, raising up an army of angels, losing a battle, and being sent down into hell is not in the Bible. I can say that pretty confidently now because the verses we looked at don't actually... There's enough in those verses by like literal words that show me they're referring to a man, to a real king. Lost my train of thought. And then we don't even need to break down those verses because those concepts of heaven and hell wouldn't come around till much, much later. So then where did we all get this idea, this story that we all seem to know? Even non-Christians, we've all been told this story our whole lives. And I started trying to look up where the first versions of the story came from, and I found... I've heard of this book, but I've never read it. Of course, there's the Divine Comedy with Dante's Inferno, and that gets into the various levels of hell and the different punishments for each person of hell. And that one goes more into actual hell. And that was written in, I think, the 1600s. And then this other book I've known the name of, this poem, is Paradise Lost by John Milton. And this was written in 1667. So this is way after all of the Bible stuff, way after the formation of the church. And this has all the elements of the fall story. There's war in heaven, Satan being cast down, everything. It even goes into the angels. He chooses as his commanders and captains. It has the war. It has them being cast down. It has all that. It has the whole thing. And then, of course, we have our more descriptive versions of hell that we all see everywhere, from the cartoony fire to the torture to your Bosch paintings. He did a lot. Herminius Bosch did some crazy, this was all 16th, 17th century. All of this stuff came around. So for this episode, there you have it. I mean, the story of the fall of Satan is not in the Bible. It came much later. And I think that story got into everyone's heads over the generations and hundreds of years. And then they went back and looked at some of these quotes from Isaiah and what was it? Probably mess it up. Ezekiel? Anyway, those verses I went over. And then they tried to apply that to them. But anyway, for all of those reasons I said, it doesn't really line up. That story came much, much later. And I want to be clear, I'm not trying to disprove the Bible or disprove the existence of Satan or heaven or hell. I want to look at what the Bible actually says. And the Bible, as far as I can tell, I've been working on this episode for a while now. That story came much later. Now, does that mean that's not how it shook out in the Bible? I don't know. Maybe God inspired these artists and these writers thousands of years later to, give us this imagery. That's possible, I guess. I know a lot of art is inspired by God. But if we're just using the Bible, oh, and I even looked up the Apocrypha, like Maccabees and Enoch, and I looked up all the supplemental Apocrypha that's in the Catholic Bible. I think it's in Ethiopian Orthodox Bible. Anyway, a few Bibles have these extra books if you don't know what the Apocrypha is. And nothing in there either. So no canonical books in the Bible or even its supplement Apocrypha have the story of the fall of Satan in it. And that's really what I wanted to cover on this episode. It was interesting to me that I couldn't actually find that story. And looking at scholars online, they referred me to these two passages mainly. And that just doesn't hold water to me on very, very simple levels. Again, verses clearly reference man. If anything, they reference Adam. And I'm repeating myself, but I like to look at things in simple concepts. These ideas of heaven and hell and angels and demons and God and Satan were not fully fleshed out in any means by the time those passages were written. So that's it. This has opened a lot of interesting stuff I want to study. So maybe this will be a 3-parter. I was going to do kind of the devil in the first one, what the Bible actually says about hell and stuff in the second one. But now I want to go more into, when did Satan become fully fleshed out? Because this one I ended up just focusing on the fall, the story of the fall. And that's fine. That's awesome. We're about out of time anyway. I mean, I have all the time, but I'm trying to keep them around 30, 39, 40 minutes. And I think that's all I wanted to talk about this one. All the imagery we get from, and the story of the fall from grace of Satan, his jealousy of God. As far as I can tell, that's like the story we know is fleshed out to a T in Paradise Lost by John Milton from the 1600s. And then we have Hieronymus Bosch, the painter, and we have Divine Comedy, which includes Dante's Inferno. So I think this story of the fall of Satan and the war in heaven was a much later thing. I'm not saying it's fiction or not true. I'm just saying it's not in the Bible. So we're going to leave it there, folks. I'm going to hope, see if my new camera works. I hope it does. And I'm already working on the next one. This is the kind of stuff I want to do. It's fun. It's interesting to me. And I want to dive into some of these things that, again, I'm not trying to disprove the Bible. I'm a Christian. I believe in Jesus, the resurrection. But I really do want to get into what the Bible actually says, because I think a lot of it has been twisted and misinterpreted. And in this case, we have a story that we all knew as Christians growing up that has been taught in churches and even mentioned in sermons that literally is nowhere in the Bible. So I want to start, filtering out, what does the Bible really say? What does Jesus really say? And to really understand it, we got to filter out some stuff. And I don't mean filter anything out of the Bible. I mean, we need to filter out these these conceptions and these ideas we have that we just take for granted. I mean, my whole life took for granted that the story of the fall of Satan was in the Bible. I thought I could just look it up. And that turned out to not be the case. So anyway, this has been a fun one for me. We're going to, oh my gosh, and an embarrassing one for me due to my constant little burps. But it is what it is. So, all right, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I love you guys, and thank you for you folks who are listening and supporting. And we'll see you on the next one. I'm already working on it. I'm excited. And that's it. All right, I love you guys again. Go with Christ. We'll talk to you next time. Bye.
Everything goes my way when I want it to. Everything rises above the soul. Everything wants to be my friend in need. What I want and what I need. Peace.